Let's bring in for more analysis Dr. Marta Lorimer, lecturer in politics, with a special focus on the European Union and Europe in general. Dr. Marta Lorimer is based at Cardiff University, and thank you very much for being with us. In your view, with your expertise, what does this fall of the government mean for France in the broader European context right now?
This really places the European Union in a difficult position because at a time when the EU really needs stability and it needs some form of leadership, it is in a situation where neither France nor Germany actually have a government. And these are the two countries that are the most responsible for setting the direction of European integration.
Dr. Marta, bear with us a moment. We're going to bring in Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent in Kyiv. Gulliver, of course, is our Ukraine correspondent who's been following matters for us there since the very start of Russia's invasion. And, of course, Gulliver's been based there for many years and has seen the whole development of the situation. Gulliver in Kyiv, I hope you can hear us. There you are. Great to see you, sir. I hope you're well. I'm wondering what the feeling is where you are about what's happening in Paris right now.
Well, I can't say that Ukrainians are paying a huge amount of attention to France. There's been a really unusual amount of foreign news in the Ukrainian media lately, and most of it is about events in Georgia and Syria. Ukrainians follow them very closely because they see them as broadly in the category of potential problems for Russia. And then in third place, you've got Romania, which has seen an unexpected sudden rise of far-right pro-Russian forces. And that's basically a trend that Ukrainians view as very worrying. And the latest upheaval in France is seen as being part of that trend. In France, it's not just on the far right, but also on the far left. Forces seen as either being somewhat pro-Russian or too soft on Russia, playing too big a role, as Ukrainians would see it, in the political process. And then there's another trend in European politics, or reality of European politics, that this event in France really throws into light, which is the constraints on the budgets of Western European democracies. Ukrainians, also Donald Trump, a large part of the expert community, are saying loudly and clearly, and have been for years now, that Europe needs to spend more money on defense, not only to help Ukraine, but to stop being so dependent on the United States. But look at the situation. Countries are running deficits. When they try to pass measures that make any kinds of cuts or increase taxes, it becomes unpopular. Populist opposition parties take advantage of that. Governments become unstable. How do they imagine they're going to be able to make the kinds of increases in defence spending that experts are saying are needed? In the more immediate future, there could be some repercussions on France's contribution to aid for Ukraine, but in a way they already knew that. Sébastien Lecornu, the defence minister, already said a couple of weeks ago that France wouldn't be able to make its target of €3 billion for Ukraine this year. But France is not a huge contributor compared to others in Europe, financially speaking. They've only contributed 3.18 billion since 2022. Germany and the Nordic countries and the United Kingdom are much more important in terms of military and financial support for Ukraine. But France was, of course, very important on the political front, with Emmanuel Macron being one of the most outspoken leaders in terms of support for Ukraine, after he made a sort of turn in that direction at the beginning of this year, when he famously suggested that French troops as instructors could be potentially sent to Ukraine. So Ukrainians see him as being very much on their side, don't like to see him weaken, certainly wouldn't like to see him go. Although it has to be said that what he said at the time was very badly received in France and internationally, but look what's happening now. Just now, Germany wouldn't rule out potentially sending either instructors or peacekeeping troops to Ukraine either.
Gulliver Cragg, thank you very much indeed for joining us there live from Kyiv. Gulliver Cragg, our Ukraine correspondent. Let's go back to Dr. Marta Lorimer, lecturer in politics, focusing on EU, European issues at Cardiff University. Dr. Marta, we heard there from Gulliver Cragg, our correspondent in Kyiv, about what the take is there and what's going on. This issue about how Europe can contribute towards Ukraine's fight. Clearly, Macron has been a key leader in trying to push things forward, even if, as Gulliver says, France has contributed less than other countries.
Yes, Emmanuel Macron has been very keen to make sure that Europe supported Ukraine and that the European Union tried to pull its weight in these terms. And again, this has kind of worked while he was still perceived as something of a leader with a stable majority. But the problem for Macron is that he has not had a stable majority in at least a year. And in the 3 months, basically, in the last 3 months, it was very clear that the Barnier government was going to have a lot of trouble keeping any sort of control over France.
The whole thing started, of course, with the European elections back in June. And from then,
Yes.
of course, the result for Emmanuel Macron's Centre Party was near on a humiliation in terms of how badly defeated they were and how much the French far right gained.
Exactly. This political instability started very much with the EU elections this summer, when the National Rally did incredibly well, and that prompted Macron to call a snap election so that they could clarify the situation and hopefully end up in a position where someone at least would have a majority. This hasn't really worked out, whereas his party previously had, if not a majority in parliament, it was still able to broadly function as a government. He no longer has that. And that really places France in a difficult position in terms of political stability.
How important, Dr. Marta, is Macron and France to the European project? I mean, any aspect of the European project, how important is the French voice, the French presence, the French leadership?
The French leadership is really essential to the European project. We know that the European Union tends to function better when France and Germany are acting as leaders and are acting in concert. Now, of course, we are in a position where neither of these countries is able to actually provide the leadership that Europe needs. And it is not particularly clear that there is anyone else who could replace them. So we are really in uncharted territory for the European Union because it doesn't have a functioning Franco-German couple, and it doesn't really have an obvious successor for that leadership.
Gulliver was talking about the things that people in Ukraine are reading about and are watching on their media, and talking about the situation in Georgia, the situation regarding what's happening in Romania, for instance, the ideas, the things that Russia trying to sort of influence matters. And again, most of Europe has been victim of that kind of campaign too. Do you feel that a weakening of President Macron's situation will lead to a similar kind of weakening across the EU? I'm thinking of countries such as Hungary, where Viktor Orban is very much, pro Vladimir Putin. Movements, again, in Central Europe along those lines. Could this open that door a little wider?
This could open that door a little wider, although what we do have to remember is that people like Viktor Orban are still very much a majority amongst European leaders. So there is still a broad consensus amongst most European leaders in terms of where the EU should be going or where the European Union should stay. I think the real problem here is that the European Union right now is in a position of stall. It's in a status quo that doesn't necessarily work for what it is going to face in the coming years. So the process for European integration needs to restart in some way, but it doesn't really have the kind of leadership it needs for that.
And that integration, there are many, of course, in Kyiv who would want that to include Ukraine. Do you think that will happen?
Not for several years, I think. In the European Union, there isn't that much appetite for further EU enlargement. So whatever they do, they will be taking this enlargement very, very slowly.
Dr. Marta Lorimer, lecturer in politics with a focus on the EU and European politics in general at Cardiff University there in Wales. Thank you very much for joining us. A pleasure having your analysis of the situation. Most valuable to our viewers. Dr. Marta Lorimer, thank you very much indeed.